Hello, Wonder. Tonight, I'll take you on a voyage guided not by maps or compasses, but by wind, wood, and the scent of cinnamon rising before it's even loaded. This isn't a tale of adventure in the loud sense. It begins in the hushed harbor of old Amsterdam, where ropes loosen slowly and the deck creaks just enough to let the sea know it's time. An apprentice listens to the sound of lines slipping into the water, not counting in meters or knots, but in seconds of delay, the kind that only the patient truly hear. Further south, somewhere beyond the channel's churn, a quiet storm waits. Lamps sway aboard the Batavia in rhythms that have nothing to do with time and everything to do with stillness. Rain speaks in ellipses across the deckhouse roof. Nothing urgent, just dot, dot, dash. As if the sky were trying to lull you into punctuation. Soon, the cargo hold will begin to smell like cloves. Spice always arrives first through imagination. By the time the first sack touches timber, the hammocks are all ready. Dreaming. The captain, too, writes one line per night in a palm-sized notebook bound in tortoiseshell. One entry simply reads, "Cinnamon prefers dawn." No one knows what it means, but everyone agrees it feels true. And when dawn finally flares, crimson off the coast of Java, nobody rushes. Even the sea holds its breath. The ropes that began this voyage have stiffened into memory. Each knot, each loop, each soft order has become part of the ship's own quiet story. You don't need to understand it all. You only need to be here. Now, resting in the hush between spices and sunrise. So dim your lights, settle in with your headphones, and if you can, sit near an open window. Let the wind carry us gently. If you enjoy these quiet voyages, feel free to subscribe, just in case the next one begins where your breeze starts. And if you'd like, let me know where and when you're watching from. Perhaps the next whisper will find you there. Asterisk you. Might not expect that a single hemp line creaking against a Dutch bollard could signal the start of a 40-meter lullaby. Yet the moment those ropes loosen at the quay in old Amsterdam, the whole harbor seems to hush so it can listen. But gulls quiet first, curious perhaps, or merely polite. Then the cooper's hammer falters mid-tap as if he too must confirm the Batavia's planking still responds with that low. Hollow-thrummed sailors swear as half timber, half throat-clearing anticipation. Down on the deck, apprentices ease. Fenders free, learning that the weight of rope is measured chiefly in seconds of delay before a splash, not in any units a merchant could ensure. No one rushes. The Dutch East India Company pays in spices, not speed, and cinnamon never grows quicker, for lack of dawdling. A journeyman notes in his pocket diary that each coil released today contains roughly 6,000 twisted fibers, which sounds invented until you realize he counts them the way children count sheep, methodically, hopefully never quite finishing, before sleep arrives. By the time the last line whispers goodbye against oak, an entire parchment scroll of idle arithmetic has lulled most thoughts into a tide pool of gentle numbers. The harbor gaps widen. The town's stepped rooftops recede like meek theater curtains, and the still water of the IJ mirrors sky until no one can tell which is leaving which. But beyond the channel churn the southern sea's wide belts of gray that roll their shoulders, long before anyone on deck can see them. A fortnight out, the Batavia meets that first round spirited storm. Lamps, hung from tar-specked beams, sway with the contemplative rhythm of a cat deciding whether to stand or sleep again. Each swing marks perhaps 3 heartbeats, perhaps 1. Storm time refuses ordinary math. Someone ties extra leather around the captain's chair legs to stop the squeak, only to discover silence exaggerates every other creak tenfold. So the leather is removed, squeak restored, equilibrium achieved. Rain taps Morse on the deckhouse. Roof ... though nobody aboard reads its code. They only know the pauses between drops feel politely timed, like ellipses inviting comment. A bosun records in the night book that the barometer fell 2 notches and a sigh, the sigh being his own, but entered nevertheless for completeness. Below, the surgeon's instruments clink in rhythm, creating an accidental C glass. Carillon that reminds one patient of distant church bells. He falls asleep mid-stitch, waking only when a particularly persuasive roll convinces both thread and story to continue. Somewhere past the cape, with the waves calmer but dream still, foamy, the whole begins to smell unmistakably of clothes warm, ticklish, impossible to ignore. Spice manifests before cargo is even loaded, at least according to youthful imagination. So by the time the first sacks are hoisted aboard at Mauritius, every hammock already sways in phantom fragrance. The captain, who pretends indifference, keeps a private notebook smaller than his palm, bound in flattened tortoiseshell. Inside he writes a single line each night, always ending exactly at the right margin as though respecting an invisible shoreline. One entry simply says, "Cinnamon prefers dawn," a statement unhelpful to navigation but somehow encouraging. To morale, galley boys test it by leaving a shard of bark on the windowsill. Come sunrise, condensation pearls along its edge like applause. They conclude the note is accurate, a rare event, and reward themselves by inventing a game that involves sliding nutmeg kernels across the map table without nudging Java out of place. Each successful glide earns the victor a theoretical estate, somewhere in the Banda Islands. By Voyages' end, several boys own entire archipelagos of air-drawn property, tax-free and spectacularly fragrant, when at last crimson dawn flares off the Javan coast. Even season mates pause, tea halfway, to lips, because the horizon looks less like morning and more like a long ember pulled from a pipe to cool. The sails catch that color, blushing faintly, and the Batavia seems embarrassed to arrive so dramatically after weeks of gray discretion. The cinnamon scent that once hid in the hold now mingles with tropical air, turning every shallow breath into a bakery rumor. Deckhands lean on railings sticky with varnish and salt and realize the ropes, which started all this, have stiffened into storylines. They remember each knot set, each loop eased, each silent order carried from hand to hand. No cannon salute, only the low percussion of hull against New Waters marks entry. Papers will be stamped, coins counted, spices graded, but not before the ship idles a moment longer in that sweet, reddish hush, giving thoughts time to settle like silt in a bottle. Pages of the log remain blank, ready for quill scratches. That will seem urgent then and drowsy later. For now, the captain closes his tortoiseshell book without writing. Perhaps Cinnamon already said enough. You can close yours too if you keep one. The ropes of waking loosen. The storm has passed. The spices have named themselves. And the dawn off Java is more than willing to hold the scene, lids half down, until sleep slips you ashore on its own uncharted breeze. You might not expect that a circle only 1/10 of a centimeter across, the tidy void punched along a postage stamp's edge, could summon machinists to debate tooth counts beneath gas lamps, coax philatelist to measure gaps with whispers, and inspire one mercifully brief fashion for vanilla-scented perforations, calibrated to 11.5 holes per 2 centimeters. Yet here we are, wandering the slow, papery chronicle of stamp perforation gauges. If you're still awake by the time, an Antwerp postmaster sighs that 12 holes bind friendships more securely than glue, feel free to subscribe. Or simply tuck the thought like an unpaid bill behind a magnet. The mail will keep traveling whether anyone logs your yawn dot. The tale begins in 1848 when Henry Archer, a London printer itching to hasten sorting lines, drills 12 pins into a brass bar and presses it through a sheet of penny reds. The pins, left over from umbrella manufacturing, pierce rad cotton fibers with a thunk polite as a library stamp. Archer notes each punch circle falls like confetti, reminding him of snowfalls so miniature it would melt if second-guessed. His prototype spaces the holes 2 millimeters apart because the umbrella mold already owned that rhythm. Early users find separation a joy. No more scissor snips clumsy as sheep shears. Yet one clerk complains the holes grip too fiercely, tearing Queen Victoria's chin when impatience strikes. Archer trims distance to 1.8 millimeters, raising the mysterious gauge number holes per 2 centimeters from 10 to 11. Thus, the language of gauges, part math, part lullaby, slips quietly into postal ledgers dot across the Atlantic. American presses adopt a rival wheel and pen machine, whose sprockets prefer a softer steel tooth and an oddly specific, spacing 1.86 millimeters, yielding 10.5 gauge. This half measure soon divides collectors into camps calm as meadow fences, round number purists versus fractional romantics. One micro hook drifts every 30 seconds or so, as St. Louis clerk times how long it takes to separate a strip of 510 gauge stamps versus 11 gauge. He records the difference as one exhale, publishes nothing but tells everyone at lunch, and rumor allocates the exhale to Science Dot. Meanwhile, New Zealand experiments with roulette cutting little slits instead of holes, claiming dustless elegance. Shipboard humidity warps slits into accidental lace, and island accountants condemn the method after ink seeps through frayed flaps like shy octopi arms. Holes return. The gauge chosen 12.5 because that is what the second-hand perforator from Sydney already owned. Machines guide taste more often than deliberation, and stamps obediently inherit personality from iron dot by 1870 Bavarian designers. Chase security through micro perforations, 14 tiny bites per 2 centimeters, each aperture scarcely wider than a fly's waist. Postal clerks applaud crisp edges, but housewives attempting to tear single stamps for market letters curse. The finicky teeth. A Munich pharmacist invents the postage tweezer brass tongs as thin as regret to rescue fingertips. Sales flourish. Pharmacists secretly hope stamps never relax their bite. In response, Italian printers issue leisurely 11-gauge issues, scented faintly of olive oil from residual press grease, assuring the world that Mediterranean calm extends even to mail. Scene drifts into the fluorescent hush of 1920s sorting halls. Conveyor belts clatter, and automatic feeders discover that perforations narrower than 11-gauge jam gears, wider than 13-gauge, flutter off track. Engineers advise a Goldilocks 11.5, a compromise soon codified in training manuals described as optimal for fingers and flanges alike. Still, colonies keep quirks. Barbados prints stamps at 1412 compound gauge, taller holes on sides. Coarser bites at top and bottom because 2 separate perforators work opposite shifts and meeting in the middle feels unnecessary. Collectors decades later will catalog such oddities in hushed excitement, as if discovering constellations long after the stars first winked, war economies darken presses. Pin steel is rationed, and worn punches crater edges into ragged moons. A Chicago inspector measures burr height with a fingernail, declaring anything catchier than mill file grit unfit for morale. Replacement pins arrive carbon lean, bending after 100,000 strikes. Newly soft holes measure 10.8 gauge by Friday, 10.6 by Monday. A gradual slack that nobody records except perhaps a drowsy maintenance man who marks each decline on the back of his pay stub. His graph looks like a hillside gentle enough. For sheep, Peace brings phosphor bands for machine detection, and perforations must align so sensors hum happily. The British post office trails elliptical holes ovals, yawning like lazy zeros arguing airflow improves gum drying. Gauge math bends. Ovals count as 1.5 in chart formulas. A detail few notice and none dream of reciting aloud unless insomnia insists. Children soaking envelopes for stamp albums complain ovals stick to palms. Manufacturers reply by adding tiny talc dust, which smells faintly of school cupboards, tripling the yawn potential of anyone cataloging definitive series after supper. Scene. 3 idols beneath LED desk lamps wear phylacteries wheeled plastic gauges shaped like fish skeletons. They slide teeth along edges, whispering numbers 11, 12 times 11 and a half, 9 3/4 like bedtime mantras. An online forum debates whether humidity in Manila swells paper, effectively shrinking gauge by 0.1. Someone tests by freezing stamps, then thawing them. Results ambiguous, discussion soothingly endless. Meanwhile, minimalist designers issue self-adhesive labels with faux perforation printing. No holes at all, just dotted ink. Traditionalists clutch magnifiers, morning tactile tear rituals. Postal authorities claim customers prefer peel and stick. Surveys prove customers rarely prefer surveys, and the argument furls like a coiled strip. Snug, circular, unresolved. ISO eventually nods its tidy head, releasing technical standard 9998-2, recommended perforation range 1012 for manual handling, 1214 for high-speed sorters, 810 reserved for oversized commemoratives. An XB diplomatically acknowledges heritage gauges, a phrase so gentle it practically dozes mid-sentence. Press operators glance at the PDF, confirm existing. Wheels match 11 and a half. Sip lukewarm coffee, and let the matter nap on the hard drive. In a footnote, the authors thank all respondents who returned timing sheets. Though half were blank, having served as bookmarks and reports, no one intends to reread. Blankness is sometimes feedback. 2-dot eco printers arrive with sugar cane. Fiber paper softer than pine. Old pins tear through like eager beaks. Engineers broaden hole diameter by 1 hair width, nudging gauge to 10.25. Labels brag of smoother cheer and biodegradable chads, edible by earthworms tested once, politely. Packaging adds a sniff of vanilla, allegedly calming recycling bin. Anxiety. Some collectors store these sheets in freezer bags, fearing ants. Others move them anyway, trusting post boxes to prefer cookies to glue. Lift any envelope within reach and run a thumb across its serrated crown, maybe bold 10-gauge arches. Maybe a timid 14 pinpricks, perhaps faux perforation smooth as silence. Feel each rise and fall like miniature gates that once guided pens, machines, expectations. Inhale the whisper of paper fibers parted yet still allied. Exhale as thumb strolls from bite to bite, again, until breath matches the gentle wave of gaps shaped by decades of pragmatic compromise. Notice how every hole is absence doing useful work and emptiness allowing separation with minimal fuss. Much like the pauses between these words, making meaning hushed enough to settle behind your eyes. Soon lids grow heavy, gauges blur. 11 becomes 11 and a half, becomes something comfortably approximate. If dreams visit now, let them drift like tiny paper chads, weightless, numerous. Oddly perfect circles that float beyond postal zones, beyond counting, until they settle softly into the perforated margins of night, ready to tear away at dawn without waking you at all. You might not expect the humble center of a circular brass knob, set slightly below the line of your hip, to have enticed masons to measure king's elbows, coax janitors to argue with poets about sleeve length, and encourage one brief 1920s. Craze for jasmine-oiled sets mounted exactly 91 centimeters from floorboards. Yet here we drift, following the slow, turning chronicle doorknob height. If you're still awake by the time an Edinburgh steward murmurs that 94 centimeters gives grudges room to cool before grasp, feel free to subscribe, or let the latch click of its own accord. Doors will keep opening whether or not anyone logs your blink dot in the first hush of old timber halls. Long before round knobs existed, there were beams dropped into wall sockets, lifted again by shoulders rather than hands. Monastery carpenters in 12th century Burgundy tire of bruised scapulae and bore finger-wide holes through boards instead, choosing height by pressing thumb and forefinger together at heart level about 1 cubit and a sigh above the rush strewn. Floor. Annotations and marginalia describe this as convenient to souls bowed by morning matins, which is to say low enough that a monk half asleep can still fumble passage to the cloister garden. Centuries later, antiquarians with tape measures discover these holes hover near 87 centimeters, but the monks, dreaming more of psalms than metrics, never guess at numbers. They only know that on fog-heavy dawns, the latch feels exactly where the mind hopes it will be. A visiting abbot notes the placement keeps novice shoulders from knocking candle stubs economical, if unromantic, reasoning that when knobs finally sprout across Renaissance Italy as bronze pears turned on foot-powered lathes. Artists debate whether a knob should align with a gentleman's sword, hilt allowing seamless flourish, or with a dowager's knitting elbow allowing minimal stoop. Sword hilt wins in Venice, knitting elbow in Bologna, and builders hauling both priceless compromise at 92 centimeters simply because their plumb bobs already dangle at that mark when suspended from lintels cut too short. 1 micro hook pirouettes past every half minute. A Florentine midwife records in her ledger that women in labor lean on knobs precisely breast high, begging carpenters to consider softer metal. Her note of complaint fares no better than breadcrumbs under fresco dust, yet demonstrates that even thresholds birth opinions. Steam presses louder questions into brick. Victorian architects crave order, and so 1887's model building bylaws propose 93 centimeters, citing expedience for both child and man. The number, rumor insists, emerges from averaging the waistband height of 3 surveyors whose tea went cold during deliberation. Factories install the specification, though foreman nudge handles downward on tool sheds, defending bent-back comfort. Meanwhile, grand hotels ascend, their mahogany doors sprouting knobs exactly 1 meter from marble because bellboys vote silently. By repeated usage, that taller permits empty-handed turns while balancing trunks on forearms. Bellboys, though, voiceless on policy, leave smudges read by managers like Braille. The darkest ring of polish foretells tomorrow's maintenance memo. Storms of the 20th century roll in, and with them building codes bloom as thick as ivy. Chicago's 1923 ordinance assigns 94 centimeters to exterior doors, citing glove thickness in winter and average American humorous articulation, phrases that lull even inspectors toward wool collar naps. Hospitals protest. Wheelchairs multiply and cannot lift chilled gloves so high. A quiet revision broadens the band. From 89 to 96 acceptable, provided signage states intention. Bureaucracy learns to breathe by millimeters. A hospital in Des Moines mounts every room at 89 center, but misreads. Blueprint scale and installs janitor closets at 82. Cleaners rejoice in early victory for ergonomic diversity. Nurses note fewer spilled bleach pails, data which hides in a footnote of a sanitation report no one cites but everyone. Follows subconsciously when hunting mop handles in after-hour silence. War austerity pairs brass to iron and iron to bakelite. Plastic, lighter, drifts upward once again as hinges settle. Post-war families grow taller on vitamin promises. Magazine articles urge modern homes to set knobs at 95, matching confident shoulders of tomorrow. Yet confidence trips over childhood, and toy manufacturers distribute rubber sleeves allowing little palms to twist knobs unaided, effectively lowering reach by 5 without offending drywall. Mothers tape the sleeves in place, fathers remove them on dinner guests' approach. Sleeves migrate like migratory birds, marking seasons of growth in suburban corridors. Fluorescent 1970s offices adopt aluminum lever handles touted as universal, flourishing outward at 93 so wrists need not rotate. Industrial psychologists paid by the hour, film employees exiting conference rooms, counting seconds lost per centimeter shift. Their charts bloom like sleepy tulips. 92 claims victory by a whisker, but 93 looks tidier. In press photos, so marketers choose the rounder aesthetic. Somewhere, a technician shortens screws on one test door, lowering it half a centimeter simply because his lunch break ends early. 3 decades later, that door alone in the corporate museum still clicks with oddly welcoming ease. Proof that accidents sometimes measure comfort more kindly than standards. Digital locks arrive humming with blue LEDs. Thumb scanners like Pixel. Seashells want chin-level prominence, so condo developers lift hardware to 98, citing firmware splash screens requiring near-eye reading. Early adopters tilt heads. Chiropractors anticipate windfall. Within 3 product cycles, instructions reprint at larger font. Height drops back to 94, and tenants feel taller without effort. Home automation enthusiasts mount badges. Wherever drywall studs permit, leading corridors dotted like musical staves, a lullaby of quiet beeps at inconsistent pitch. ISO eventually pours tea, consults charts, and releases 2011 standard 14,727. Recommended handle centerline heights. Residential and institutional. It gently prescribes 90 to 100 centimeters with allowances for special populations. The phrase special population sounds almost affectionate, as if knobs themselves could adopt. Now, late evening apartments glow phone blue. Parents install childproof covers, effectively raising functional height to 108. Meanwhile, ergonomic bloggers champion kneeling meditation doors fitted at 79 for floor cushion households. Nobody truly. Objects, wood screws obey when easier than law. Historians of tomorrow will peer at lath scans, guessing social status by knob altitude. Perhaps they will misjudge preference for accident, or vice versa, but the tale will turn gently as it always has. On threads of comfort and chance. Rest your own hand on the nearest knob, round or lever, cool or warm. Feel its center like a moon cheek nestling in your palm. Note where elbow bends, where shoulder settles, how breath slows to match invisible pendulums of centuries, turning quiet brass. Inhale the faint alloy tang mingled with soap residue. Exhale as fingers rotate gravity. Doing half the work, memory the remainder. Turn once, maybe twice, listening to the latch sing a muffled vowel. Each click carries measures of monk's thumbs, sword hilts, bellboy smudges. Wheelchairs, quiet petitions, macro charts of stopwatch scholars, firmware fonts, and soft. Accidents that line screws an eighth too low. Soon the door stands ajar and you refrain from crossing, hovering in that threshold hush where standards pause and hallways wait. Let eyes dim to match the corridor's gloom. Thoughts, like wandering children, will grasp at invisible handles set precisely where drowsiness expects, easing every creak. And if dreams happen by, they will find portals already unlatched, swinging neither high nor low, but at the just so height where stories tiptoe out and drift along the midnight balustrade, leaving you behind safe, still, and gently closed until morning asks, with a knob-level whisper, whether you might like to step through once more. You might not expect that the shallow grooves squeezed into the brass ferrule of a wooden pencil, those faint ridges pressed just above the eraser, could entice machinists to count thunderclaps between factory whistles, coax schoolchildren to guess the thickness of silence, and ignite one happily brave fad for lavender-polished crimps, set in patterns of exactly 8, then 7, then 8 again. Yet here we drift, following the slow, gently metallic chronicle of ferrocrimp. Counts. If you're still awake by the time a Boston stationer murmurs that 9 crimps whisper confidence into subtraction problems, feel free to subscribe or simply let the eraser rest against the margin. Arithmetic will still find its way whether anyone tracks your blinking. The first creases appear in 1850s New Jersey, when a brush bristle maker named Ebenezer Tatum repurposes his crimping pliers meant for securing hog hair to paint handles to bite softly into a strip of recycled tin wrapped around cedar. 3 shallow presses prove enough to anchor the eraser plug. A 4th, unplanned, adds symmetry his customer admires. Tatum keeps the extra squeeze, shipping pencils with 4 tidy ridges. A ledger entry dated April 1856 reads, 4 keeps cork in place, although the eraser is not cork at all, merely gum rubber trimmed to fit. Schoolmistresses lobby innovation. No one misses the fragile glue that formerly surrendered mid-lesson. Like daydreams under sunlight, years later, collectors will nickname these pioneers Tatum 4s, unaware the number owes its existence to an idle twitch of a tired hand. Across the Atlantic, German manufacturers favor brass mixed with a breath of zinc, reluctant to trust tin against damp backpacks. Their heavier alloy slips under the crimp, die with a clink more musical than Tatum's tin, so technicians add 2 extra grooves, claiming the sound indicates proper persuasion. 6 crimp ferrules ship with Gothic lettering. Pupils tap, them on desks, delighted by the sharper ping. 1 micro hook flits past. A Hamburg accountant times the resonance of each tap, deciding 6 crimps raise pitch by barely a semitone. He reports the finding to nobody in particular, yet continues tapping through balance sheets, soothing boredom 1 metallic chirp at a time. By 1888, American factories adopt steam-powered rotary crimpers, flywheels sprouting 12 steel tongues that nibble ferrules as pencils glide beneath like sleepy parade floats. 12 crimps prove excessive, cedar splinters. Operators disengage alternate tongues, settling on 8, partly by accident, partly because 8 divides evenly into 96, the machine's revolutions per minute when the foreman prefers. Fewer sparks. Shipping manifests note octocrimp without elaboration. Meanwhile, a Cleveland teacher complains the new pattern tears calluses on thumbs during essay marathons. Her letter to the manufacturer receives no reply until a salesman, hunting goodwill, visits and observes her intertwining ribbon around the grooves for comfort. He later markets colored ferrule sleeves at county fairs, inadvertently founding a miniature craft so soothing that by winter, several small towns host eraser cozy clubs, distracting, yes, but never disruptive. Scene slides into the fluorescent hush of 1910 patent offices. Inventor Clarence David submits a drawing for a serrated ferrule with alternating deep and shallow crimps, intended to channel eraser crumbs away from fingers. Patent examiners measure the drawing in fractions of an inch. The deep grooves equal exactly 3/32, shallow 2. David's claims alternating depths hypnotize the thumb into proper grip. The patent issues, few companies adopt it, but one traveling salesman demonstrates by rotating a pencil under gaslight so alternating facets catch sparks of reflection like distant lighthouses. Children at the demonstration forget the math problems entirely, transfixed by the quiet shimmer. Sales spike briefly, then subside, yet somewhere a diary notes the pattern pleasing to twirl during spelling lists, evidence that comfort often outranks utility. War economies change metal blends, brass seats to aluminum. Crimps lose sharpness because soft alloy deforms unless pressed deeper. Machines adjust, pressing 7 bold bites instead of 8 subtle ones, reasoning fewer. Wider grooves distribute pressure gently. Soldiers receive field pencils with 7 crimps lucky number, says the quartermaster, though luck is measured in letters home rather than geometry. Rain flattens aluminum ridges until some vanish entirely, prompting one corporal to extra lines with penknife, creating homegrown crimp counts that vary with boredom levels and pocket knife sharpness. After peace, marketing minds discover symmetry again. The most common count becomes 8, reinstated because machines of differing vintages compromise here. Older 8-tongue wheels align with newer 6-tongue models retrofitted with 2 blank spaces. Catalogs boast double quad grip, a phrase as meaningless as it is comforting. A sleepy statistician in Kalamazoo studies breakage rates, finds no correlation to crimp numbers, but does see marginally cleaner eraser detachment at counts above 9. He drafts a report titled Crimp Quantity versus Eraser Integrity, circulates 10 copies, and receives precisely 0 comments. The quiet of dismissal feels almost like gratitude, freeing him to return to counting rail cars beyond his office. Window. The plastic sleeve revolution of the 1970s threatens crimps entirely. Molded collars need no bite. Yet workers miss the tiny ridges that once caught thumbnail edges like miniature washboards. Manufacturers emboss faux grooves, purely visual, arrayed in cheerful tens around neon collars. Collectors cry foul. Without indentation, the count. Is decorative, the history cosmetic. Children care little. Their worries revolve around whether bubblegum scent lasts until recess. Still, under budget pressure, schools revert to cheaper brass-ferruled pencils. The groove makes modest comeback, now set at 9. A count chosen because one firm's procurement officer enjoys the way 9 sounds when stamped on invoices: soft, round, decisive. Scene settles beneath LED study lamps where homework yawns beside earbuds. Graphite dust flickers like brief midnight snow. A high schooler idly counts ridges: 1, 2, 3. 8. He flips another brand: 7. The difference feels like a secret code, so he posts a photo online. Comments flood with counts worldwide: 6, 8, 10, even 13 from a boutique carpenter in Kyoto who carves cedar so dense the ferrule must grip like mountain roots. A teacher glimpses the thread, assigns an extra credit project correlating crimp numbers to continent. Data proves delightfully inconclusive, but grades high because curiosity is currency teachers spend freely. Standards organizations eventually brew tea and release technical guideline 9812, ferrule mechanical retention geometry. It recommends 8 to 10 crimps at 2 mm depth for brass, 7 to 9 at 3 mm for aluminum, and any visually equivalent pattern for synthetic collars, so long as tactile tradition is honored. The phrase tactile. Tradition slips through committees unchanged, an unexpected lullaby among equations. Printers set it in italics and move on. Pick up any pencil near you, perhaps hexagonal cedar, perhaps round basswood, and roll thumb across the ferrule. Count. Softly. Maybe 6 bold ridges, maybe 8 whispering ones, maybe 9 that seem unsure whether they're company or crowd. Feel how each bite anchors pink eraser to wood, history to present, idea to correction. Inhale the faint brass graphite scent. Exhale as fingers drum across grooves, tap, pause, tap, until breath sinks with tiny hills that once mirrored umbrella. Spokes, factory revolutions, algebra denials, and the quiet patience of people who found comfort in counting what rarely matters. Soon numbers blur. 6 blurs toward 8, 8 toward sleepy infinity. Wet ferrule warm under skin, while thoughts loosen like shavings beneath a steady knife. If dreams arrive, they may file themselves neatly between crimps, each groove a cradle for unfinished sums and half-erased words, holding everything gently, until morning turns the pencil over and begins again, one careful line at a time. You might not expect that the quiet stretch between the bowl of a teaspoon and the curl of its little tail. The politely narrow bridge most people call the handle could coax metallurgists to weigh droplets of dawn on calipers, prod butlers, to measure distance between coat buttons, and spark one mercifully brief craze for rose-scented silver-plated exactly 128 millimeters long. Yet here we are, drifting through the slow, reflective chronicle of teaspoon handle length. If you're still awake by the time a Nottingham housekeeper admits that 130 millimeters lets grievances cool before stirring, feel free to subscribe, or simply allow the kettle to murmur. Water will find its simmer whether or not anyone. Tallies your blanks. The tale begins in 17th century. London coffee houses where patrons clap pewter spoons against stoneware to summon refills. Early spoons measure by happenstance. Smiths shear scrap from candlestick spills, hammering strips until the metal relents at roughly the span from thumb tip to first knuckle about. 90 millimeters because any longer wobbles annoyingly when dipped in dunce molasses. A page from the Virtuous Collector's Manual dated 1693 remarks, parenthetically, that short spoons keep slander close to the saucer, implying that gossip, like sugar, dissolves faster under shallow reach. Number. One then thinks to quantify. They merely trust the hush that settles when a spoon finds bottom of a cup without clanging dot by 1780. Refined sugar eclipses sticky treacle and cups shrink into porcelain eggshells. Silversmiths in Sheffield chase elegance, stretching handles. For graceful line, first to 100 millimeters, then 110. The extra length prevents knuckles from dunking in steaming tea, preserving glove lace from caramel stains. One micro hook floats past. A diarist notes that Admiral Nelson before Trafalgar insisted on the long-handled type, lest steam blur my glass. Though whether steam or destiny clouded his lens remains politely untested. Meanwhile, society. Hostesses commission repost vines spiraling halfway up the stem, inadvertently widening grip so far that teaspoons begin to resemble fledgling dessert spoons on stilts. Industrial revolutions hum steel into sheets, and pressed dies stamp spoons. Like lullaby repeats. American patent 247,112, 1872. Sets handle at exactly 4 1/4 inches. 108 millimeters because the press cam stalls otherwise, pinching metal at inconvenient angles. Catalog writers proclaim this measure scientifically. Proven, though proof hides in the gearbox, not the laboratory. Hotels order by the gross, trusting that standard width fits standard trays. Yet train dining cars notice vibrations bounce longer handles free of saucers. Conductors request a trim to 104 millimeters. The maker obliges by shaving molds one ridge nearer the bowl, creating a travel-sized spoon often filched by passengers as pocket souvenirs. Some estimate 500,000 tiny stowaways tour the continent inside overcoats, each clinking faint lullabies whenever locomotives sigh into tunnels. Milk tea fashions of Edwardian parlors demand still longer. Reach 120 millimeters ensures. Fingers clear mountain ranges of foam. Etiquette columns insist proper leverage aids posture. Readers quietly wonder whether posture or gossip matters more. A Manchester chemist tests dissolving rates of sugar cubes at varying depths. Determining 118 millimeter handles allows swirl radius optimal for hexagon lumps, then in vogue. His findings receive applause from precisely 3 confectioners and vanish behind fresh styles within a year. Still, somewhere in archives, a graph plots cube edges surrendering milligram by milligram. Its line dipping like a yawn, caught mid-CU RTSE Y.War economies pinch silver into ministry filings. Brass and nickel emerge, stiffer but lighter. Makers compensate by narrowing stems to save alloy, which inadvertently allows handles to lengthen without weight penalty 125 millimeters, sometimes more because accountants chase grams not. Spans. Mess hall stewards discover the longer necks double as ration scoops, sparing them separate measures for powdered eggs. They scribble an informal standard. Long spoon equals half-ounce flour on pantry doors. A fragment of arithmetic later scrub it away when peace paints kitchen's ivory again. Fluorescent 1950s. Diners introduce thick-walled mugs holding modern whipped cream peaks. Importers from Japan unveil chrome-bright teaspoons at 128 millimeters, balanced so precisely that they rock like seesaws on fingertips. Advertisements claim the length mirror's ideal transistor waveform, which means nothing to caffeine. Drifters, but sounds futuristic enough to trust. Engineers, meanwhile, construct vending machines that reserve 115 millimeters for dispensing trays. Surplus length jams gears, so factories quietly bend final 10 millimeters upward in a gentle swan neck to cheat clearance without shortening. Some patrons enjoy the ergonomic hook. Others complain it snags biscuit crumbs. Complaint and compliment. Cancel, leaving design unchanged for decades. A stalemate as comforting as the first hiss of kettle each dawn. Boredom in 1970s. Suburbia births collectible Dimitas spoons miniature art at 90 millimeters once more, etched with state birds. Or royal weddings. Families hang velvet display banners, spikes align like calendar days. Children slide teaspoons from loops, stir cocoa, return them to wrong pockets, seeding subtle chaos mom will correct at dusk. Manufacturers note surge, yet table length. Spoons remain untouched at 125 millimeters. The dual-size world coexisting like 2 pages of sheet music played in alternate octaves. One where Micro Hook, a Philadelphia librarian, measures average handle among returns to the canteen tray, 122 millimeters, and concludes, people prefer what they are given. The report hides in municipal minutes, lulling even the stenographer, ergonomist. Dance into focus by 1990, preaching neutral wrist angles. Studies suggest handles longer than palm breadth reduce pinch force, but shorter handles improve rotational control. The sweet spot hovers near 118 millimeters. Give or take a sigh. ISO convenes over herbal tea, publishing Technical Standard 31009. Teaspoon geometry functional reach, recommending 115 to 120 millimeters for adults, 105 millimeters for institutional trays, and 95 millimeters for petite service contexts, leaving room for tradition and footnotes phrased like lullabies. Variances of up to 5 millimeters should not unduly disturb user tranquility. Manufacturers print the range on boxes in delicate serifs and immediately cut handles to 117 millimeters, exactly mid-specification, because centering pleases spreadsheets even when spoons are concerned. Silicone grips glide onto stems. During early 2000s comfort craze, padding thickness effectively shortens visual length by illusion while adding a millimeter of real reach. Kitchen bloggers praise coral pink sleeves for easing arthritis. Critics grumble they collect dishwasher spots. Retailers answer with eucalyptus-infused silicone said to kill odor microbes. Handles creep to 121 millimeters, claiming offset for sleeve fillet. Everyone stops noticing numbers, entranced by color palettes named Morning Hush and Thunder Pastry, each shade drifting by like naptime clouds. Tonight, perhaps, you cradle a spoon within reach, a thrift store nickel relic at 110 millimeters, or a gleaming cafe model at 124. Maybe a Dimitas souvenir perched shyly at 89. Feel the slow slope from bowl to tip, the slight flex where metal forgives thumb pressure. Inhale the faint alloy aroma mingled with ghost sugar. Exhale as hand rocks stem gently forward, back until breath sinks with the minute arc spoons have traced for centuries between cup rim and quiet thought. Notice how each length traveled. Through decisions equal parts haste and hesitation, smiths guessing by thumb span, engineers bowing to vending slots, committees brewing tea over decimal fractions. Soon the numbers melt like grains at cup bottom. 110 diffuses toward 120, 120 toward a pleasant blur, where precision rests its eyelids. Let thumb slide along the handle's ridge, again and again, counting ridgeless ridges of buff steel until counting itself nods off, leaving only the hush. Of possible length stretch softly across night. If dreams steep now, they may dangle silver stems into teacups of starlight, swirling quietly at whatever reach feels right, neither too far nor too near, but exactly the distance where wakefulness dissolves at last like sugar in a spoon's gentle turn. You might not expect the slim red line hugging the left edge of a notebook page, the modest stripe that silently orders sentences to stay polite, could lure monks into trimming quills by moonlight, coax factory foremen to balance vats of aniline, die on bathroom scales, and ignite one mercifully brief fad for peppermint-scented margins set exactly 34 millimeters from the paper's edge. Yet here we are, drifting through the slow, ink-fragile chronicle of margin width. If you're still awake by the time a Parisian stationer murmurs that 30 millimeters gives secrets someplace to lean, feel free to subscribe or don't. The line will continue its quiet patrol whether anyone salutes. The earliest whispers rise from 12th century scriptoria where scribes, wary of book forms nibbling parchment edges, ruled generous borders as sacrificial zones. They measure width by resting 3-finger joints against the folio rim about 45 millimeters, believing worms prefer empty space to sacred text. One marginal gloss complains the creatures respect no psalm, yet statistics are lacking. Worms keep no ledgers. Still the habit sticks. And for 200 years, salters flaunt wide blank coastlines where meditation can stroll without wetting its sandals. Illuminators slip doodled hairs inside the blank, turning past deterrent into art. A monk notes that laughter muffled in margins is less sinful, a proof both reassuring and unverifiable. Printing presses shrink costs, and by 1530 German pamphlets. Cramp widths to save paper. 22 millimeters becomes common, chosen because the compositor's lead block spacer happens to match his thumbnail scar from an apprentice mishap. Type flows closer to edges. Worms still chew, but now they swallow syllables. Readers grow used to repairing meaning like knitters darning socks. A micro hook settles every half minute. A Nuremberg merchant counts missing letters per page. Reporting loss, no worse than street crossers' curses. Faint praise that nevertheless encouraged printers to keep margins narrow. Meanwhile, Venetian scholars, fearing censorship, widen borders again for later handwritten glosses 30 millimeters, this time gifting posterity with meandering annotations about weather, recipes, and secret debts. Industrial paper mills roar awake in the 1800s. Red aniline dyes bloom inexpensive. Massachusetts notebook maker Tuttle & Sons adds crimson guardrails so pupils know where not to wander. The first jig draws a line 1 inch, 25.4 millimeters from the edge only because the jig rod, salvaged from umbrella manufacture, already sits that far from its mounting screws. Early batches smear when stacked. Foremen delay packing until sunrise winds cure ink, giving birth to a schedule whereby school supplies smell faintly of dawn. Teachers adore the guide. Children treat it as cliff, occasionally plummeting through in runaway enthusiasm. Tuttle's salesman claims the gap allows a teacher's pencil to travel without grazing prose, an argument as sensible as claiming a moat keeps swans from gossiping. Railroads demand ledger pads where some stay tidy. Clerks petition for wider. Margins 32 millimeters, so audit ticks fit like sparrows on a wire. Presses comply, embossing faint vertical dashes every 2 centimeters, so eyes stay awake during columns. Accountants tap rulers against the blank, drumming rhythms that later inspire a ragtime pianist waiting in a lobby. Less margin width contributes obliquely to syncopation. No royalty check returns to the printer, but the idea that silence. On a page can carry music lingers, humming softly whenever a column ends too soon. War shortages dim crimson pigment. Factories switch to pale violet that fades under sun. By 1943, most schoolbooks host lavender borders 28 millimeters wide, a compromise squeezed by ration math. 1 centimeter narrower saves a kilometer of dye per million sheets. A quartermaster scribbles the fact on a requisition slip. No bigger than a cigarette stub. Slip vanishes in bureaucracy, yet the width persists after victory simply because machines forget how to widen rollers. Children decades later assume lavender margins are aesthetic choice, never meeting the colorless ledger where accountants applauded thrift. Fluorescent classrooms of the 1970s adopt metric with anxious eagerness. Education boards declare universal 30 millimeters. Manufacturers recalibrate knives by sawing 0.5 millimeter off guide rails and calling it progress. One disgruntled mechanic files extra even corners, producing 30.5 millimeters in the southern batch, 29.8 millimeters in the northern, a discrepancy nobody notices except a geography teacher who compares notebooks during a substitute shift, chalking variants to regional character. She pens a letter, never mails it, and later uses the sheet to catch biscuit crumbs. Laser-ruled pads in the 1990s brag of micro-precision, exactly 31 millimeters plus or minus 0.05. Packages display holograms of rulers, soothing engineers who tally tolerance the way bakers count raisins. Yet students doodle dragons across rails regardless. Dragons find margins delicious. Software note apps imitate the look, coding virtual red bars at 28 pixels from left roughly. The same spacing on most monitors because early graphic designers eyeball proportion rather than compute DPI. The digital margin inherits a casual shrug disguised as HTML ISO. Eventually brews herbal tea and publishes standard 9417.3 recommended. Margin 25 to 32 millimeters for A-series paper with footnote. Designers may exceed for aesthetic or instructional. Reasons. The phrase aesthetic or instructional reads like a lullaby. Printers continue at 30 millimeters, safe midstream. Some boutique journals rebel with 40 millimeters meditation margins, advertising room for gratitude lists. Others squeeze to 20 millimeters, eco. Slim, boasting more lines per page. Consumers buy both, proving calm and thrift alternate like soft pages in a flipbook. Lift any notebook nearby and slide a finger along the colored band. Maybe vermilion, maybe violet, perhaps pixel red. Glowing on a tablet, feel how the edge of prose meets quiet border, a seaside where words remove shoes. Inhale pulp mingled with faint dye. Exhale as fingertip patrols coastline left, right, back until breath matches slow tide of blankness. Notice each width. Arrives by accidents of worm, umbrella rod, audit tick, ration ledger. Laser curiosity decisions laid like sleepers in track, guiding sentences farther inland or letting them dip toes over precipice. Soon numbers blur. 25 millimeters leans toward 30, 30 toward restful, unmeasured space. Let pen or thought stop shy of the border, again, until rhythm settles like drowsy cricket song behind summer shed. If dreams wander in, they may stroll. Margins long widen for them broad enough to stretch, narrow enough to feel held carrying night's annotations in invisible ink that daylight will politely ignore, leaving only the gentle guardrail watching, patient for the next unhurried line. You might not expect the modest loop of bent wire that keeps papers from slipping apart, a paper clip no bigger than a moth, resting on your cuff, to have lured patent clerks into timing rainfall on courthouse steps, persuaded typists to measure. Boredom in millimeters, and sparked one fleeting fashion for peppermint oiled coils trimmed to exactly 33 millimeters. Yet here we drift, following the slow, silvery chronicle of paperclip length. If you're still awake by the Time Oslo stationer murmurs that 32 millimeters gives grudges just enough leash. Feel free to subscribe. Or don't. Sheets will still cling together whether or not anyone records your sigh. The earliest twists appear in 1867, when Samuel Fay of New York bends tin brass into crude hairpins, slides them over stock tickets, and notes, almost absent-mindedly, that a span shorter than an inch pinches too fiercely, while a span longer catches coat lining. He clips a tailor's tape at 1 1/4 inches, about 31 millimeters, because the tape's brass tip stops there by coincidence. His patent drawing lists no length. Investors assume the pinch speaks for itself. Clerks soon hoard these Fay hooks, counting them like spare heartbeats between docket stamps. No one yet imagines a standard. Only the hush that settles when pages stop fluttering like unsettled birds dot by 1899. Norwegian inventor Johan Baller presses a loop within a loop, birthing the form most wrists twirl today. Valler's prototype, bent by candlelight, stretches 34 millimeters, one for each year of his life. Factory dyes copy the dimension, and Oslo school children began wearing clips and lapels during examinations, quiet badges of rebellion sanctioned by nobody. In particular, a micro hook drifts past every half minute. A teacher times insubordination, noticing detentions correlate with longer clips snagging inkwells. She recommends 32 millimeter limits and a footnote only the printer reads. Nevertheless, future batches arrive shorter by the width of a sigh. Steam presses roar across Sheffield. Nickel steel wire hums under rollers. Engineers argue that 31 millimeters balances tensile strength with thumb comfort. They carve calibration blocks labeled 31 millimeters plus or minus hope. A joke scribbled in chalk on workbenches that rain soon wipes clean, though the block dimension stubbornly remains. Accountants celebrate. Each millimeter shaved yields an extra 1,000 clips per spool. Ledgers fill with looping zeros. Clips keep shrinking. Yet hotel concierges complain smaller loops bruise thick wads of telegram sheets. Management orders. A luxury line at 35 millimeters, plated in bureau gold, which is neither gold nor bureau, but glints just enough to justify a penny markup. During the great filing boom of the 1920s, insurance firms pack vaults with accordion. Folders. Clerks discover that 33 millimeter clips slide fastest along folder edges, neither snagging nor vanishing inside seams. An internal memo labels the size as 33 Swift, sparking marketing campaigns that trumpet swiftness but never mention length. Sales surge until the crash, when paperwork multiplies into melancholic mountains. Embattled staff prefer smaller 30 millimeter clips, which feel thriftier, more apologetic. One St. Louis claims a gesture tracks mood by clip size, jotting notes such as "mark it down, clips down," proof that even metal can echo morale. Economies ration nickel. Clips pivot to bronze and aluminum. Aluminum, too soft at 30. Unwinds like lazy springs. Factories compensate by adding 1 millimeter 31, again to stiffen curvature. Soldiers seal telegrams with these pale loops, many returning bent into fishhooks to pass idle trench hours. Post-war offices, flush with surplus, inherit mixed tins of 31 and 33. Secretaries learn to assess tension by fingertip, choosing longer for thicker minutes, shorter for personal letters. Social hierarchy whispers in the clink of wire, an unspoken code rattling inside desk drawers. Fluorescent. 1950s cubicles bloom pastel. Designers unveil vinyl-coated no-snag clips stretched to 34 millimeters, so plastic skin can stretch without strangling. The coating smells faint of new doll hair. Typists string them into bracelets during lunch, rattling like tiny tambourines while walking corridors. Facilities managers ban the jewelry after discovering printers jammed by stray loops. Still, the 34 persists, its pastel grin too cheerful to retire. Mainframe era introduces magnetic tapes that protest steel. Brass returns, brass loves. To tarnish, tarnish invites polish. Polish removes a hair's breadth each swipe. Over months, 34 slips toward 33 and a half a lazy diet few notice. A maintenance log at IBM details clip mass loss of 2% annually. Data point quiet enough to lull any reader into arithmetical reverie before coffee break.is, Ober's herbal tea, and convenes committees. In 1974, it publishes standard 7045. Recommended paperclip length, 32 millimeters plus or minus 1, citing optimal pinch to flex ratio. Dissenting Italians argue for 35, brandishing leather-bound portfolios as evidence. Compromise births twin sizes, gem standard at 32, gem large at 35. Packaging adopts polite pastel stripes to disguise indecision. Warehouse pickers call them baby and mama, never writing the nicknames down, though forklifts were affectionately whenever pallets roll by ... ComDon digitizes files. Paper use declines, but not enough to retire clips. Startups prefer neon loops molded from ABS and elongated to 36 for dramatic flourish, like stretched vowels in marketing copy. HR notes the longer clip doubles as stress fidget. Psychologists record drop in keyboard gnawing, rise in absent-minded metal twanging. The clip, like a soothing pendulum, swings length again upward without complaint. Eco-minded 2010s. Resurrects steel but boasts recycled origin. Remelted alloy. Slightly thicker. To maintain suppleness, makers squeeze to 31. Packages stamp leaf icons, whispering less is more. While a quietly satirical brand prints more is less on 37mm giants shaped like abstract whales. Consumers buy both, evidence that comfort and curiosity rarely. Share rulers. Tonight, pick up any clip near you glinting steel, pastel clad, or recycled dust, gray, and balance it on finger. Feel spring talk, squeeze, release, hear faint ping, a miniature exhalation centuries in rehearsal. Measure by thumb segments 1, maybe a whisper more gliding along the inner curve. Inhale wire scent dusted with paper fiber. Exhale as loop. Closes again and again until breath sinks with gentle recoil of arguments resolved. Reports postponed. Poems secretly stapled. Notice how every millimeter carries vestiges of umbrella rods. Trench boredom, pastel rebellion, committee teacups, and recycled goodwill. The line between 31 and 33 blurs. Numbers soften like paper edges after rain. Let clip dingle, maybe slide free. Watch it rest quietly beside unfiled thoughts. Soon eyelids mimic the loops, embrace closing, opening. Closing until waking pages cling together just enough to wait for morning. When another length, another sigh, will link sentences once more in patient wire silence. You might not expect that the quiet interval between the three meet, circles punched along the edge of a sheet of paper, the modest gaps that let pages rest on metal rings, like birds on a wire could tempt surveyors to pace courthouse corridors. With yardsticks, persuade choir librarians to hum intervals while aligning scores, and launch one happily short-lived craze for lavender-scented binders drilled at precisely 4 1/4 inches apart. Yet here we are, drifting through the slow, gently perforated chronicle of 3-ring binder hole spacing. If you're still awake by the time a Minneapolis stationer murmurs that 4 inches invites secrets to lie flatter, feel free to subscribe or let the rings click shut on their own. Documents will nestle together whether or not anyone records your yawn. The earliest punctures belonged to Prussian tax offices of the 1880s, where Carl Friedrich Sonecken, already famous for the round nib pen prods, steal pens through ledgers so new vouchers can piggyback cozy with old. His papier liquor and our 1 inch punches 2 holes exactly 8 centimeters apart. a span chosen not by science, but because his apprentice's shoelace measured that length when double knotted across the amble. Clerks learn to slide brass posts through the pair. Posts bend, pages slouch, but the punctures promise order. Nobody yet foresees a triumvirate of holes. The gap between two feels spacious enough, like silence between polite coughs. Across the Atlantic, Chicago stationery firm Wilson Jones eyes bulkier railroad invoices. In 1899, its engineers add a third ring midway, believing triangles endure shoves better than lines. They set outer holes 4¼ inches apart, center ring balanced between. Why that number? Because ledger sheets already spanned 8½ inches, and having feels, symmetrical symmetry often masquerades as destiny. Twain-like humor appears in memos. If 2 holes calm, 3 holes soothe, and soothe they do. Tremors of locomotive stockrooms no longer dog ear. Corners. A micro hook drifts past every half-minute. A rail clerk times page turns on a pocket watch. Claiming 3 holes reduce flutter by 5 seconds per document stack. He later reuses the watch to pace lunch breaks, but the statistic lingers like a lullaby footnote. Manufacturers jostle to patent punch heads that nibble precisely through 50 sheets in one sigh. The early dies stick. Punches cough out crescents instead of moons. Operators coat pins with paraffin. Paper smells faintly of candlelight. Length of spacing remains faithful to Wilson Jones's first guess, partly because molds are expensive to recast, partly because office habits ossify quicker than limestone. By 1912, school notebooks in the Midwest adopt 3 faint guide dots near margins. Students treat them like freckles, sometimes ignoring, sometimes stabbing with compass points to mimic grown-up filing. Teachers applaud any excuse for tidier. Backpacks, where scarcity thins steel. Ring nettles warp if pages tug too far sideways. Engineers test alternate holes, 3Y inches. Papers jam when turning, 4½. Handspan cramps when writing near edge. The famed 4¼ persists, a Goldilocks caught between shortage and sprawl. Quartermaster's jaw at requisition. Lines for clips, binder, spacing standard. Never spelling the standard allowed silence, safer than math when shells whistle overhead. The fluorescent hum of 1950s suburbs spreads homework across dinette tables. Kids punch essays with pastel presses shaped like submarines. Mothers praise built-in tray that collects confetti dots, later discovered by toddlers who sprinkle them. As snow in dollhouses, confetti width, exactly 6 millimeters, floats into fashion for window display snowstorms until janitors protest blocked vacuum hoses. Still, the spacing behind the snow 4.25 inches remains stalwart, a horizon few. Question. Mainframe-era offices rank punches by capacity. Junior for 5 sheets, executive for 15, industrial for manuals thick as winter afternoons. Every model guards that center-to-center devotion. An IBM ergonomic bulletin whispers that ring spacing parallels shoulder width of type pool secretaries, promoting natural gesture, pseudoscience that nevertheless comforts committees sipping weak coffee. A board technician sketches sinusoidal curves connecting holes, discovering they align with C major chord intervals on early cathode oscilloscopes. Thus, binder spacing hums unheard harmonies inside filing cabinets. He tells no one, but sometimes opens drawers just to imagine the chord. ISO brews mint tea and decides in 1982 to codify what commerce already obeys. Standard 8384-2 specifies 3 holes, 108 millimeters apart, metric echo of 4.25 inches for Class B binders, and 80 millimeters 2-hole pattern for continental Europe. An XA concedes hybrid 4-hole spacing 80-80-80 for lever arch files, calling it legacy friendly. A phrase so drowsy it could rock spreadsheets to sleep. Printers mark margins with twin guide ticks for whichever specification. The purchasing officer circles that fiscal quarter. Prices obey both, pouring perforations like equal opportunity drizzle. Meanwhile, art schools rebel with 7-ring journals, ringlets barely 2 centimeters apart, claiming page curl mimics sketchbook spontaneity. Students coil drawings inside cargo pockets. Rings warp, spontaneity sticks. The mainstream yawns. Returns to 3. A Canadian eco-brand touts binders with rings made from recycled bicycle spokes. Spokes slightly thicker, so holes expand to 7 millimeters, yet spacing stays unswayed. Ads boast classic comfort, greener click, echoing lullaby rhythms of earlier slogans. Digital dawn dims printers, but not completely. Contracts still crave ink signatures. Portable mini punches emerge, folding like beetles. Their guides slide to either metric 80 or imperial 108 millimeters. Sales copy giggles about choose your destiny. Traveling consultants mark jet lag hours by flipping rule between notches. Switching standards feels like crossing time zones without moving. Tonight, pick up any binder within reach, perhaps. University blue scarred by coffee, perhaps neon green grinning from a startup swag bag and press rings open. Clack like distant billiard balls. Balance a sheet on fingertips. Measure gap with lazy eyes. 1 palm plus a curious thumb. Glide finger along arc of metal until it meets the next anchor, then the next. A lighthouse triptych guarding coastline of graphs and doodles. Inhale faint. Tang of oxidized steel mingled with copier toner. Exhale as pages settle onto post swish, pause. Settle until breath sinks with quiet semaphore of documents nudging closer. Notice each 4.25-inch span carries whispers of Prussian shoelaces. Railroad ledgers, wartime requisitions, pastel snowflakes, harmonic oscilloscopes, and bicycle spokes polished by rain. Numbers blur. 108 millimeters leans toward 109. 4.25 inches relaxes into comfortable approximation. Let rings close once more click, then rest palm atop cover. Feeling resums, recipes, or childhood poems reclining in equidistant trust. If dreams wander now, they may step between those holes, strolling avenues of blank margin wide enough for questions, narrow enough to feel sheltered, until morning unlatches the binder with a gentle screech, ready to accept whatever new sheet drifts as softly into place. You might not expect that the faint, glossy band running along the top of a pastel square, the modest adhesive strip that lets a sticky note cling, like a sleepy gecko could lure chemists into counting exhalations between brushstrokes, coax. Janitors to weigh dust motes on postage scales, and spark one blissfully brief fad for bergamot-scented glue lines set exactly 11 millimeters wide. Yet here we drift, following the slow, quiet chronicle of sticky note adhesive width. If you're still awake by the time a Des Moines office manager murmurs that 10 millimeters leaves grievances room to breathe, feel free to subscribe, or simply let the note flutter onto your keyboard. Reminders will stick eventually, whether or not anyone callies your yawns. The tale traces back to 1968, when 3 meters researcher Spencer Silver, hunting a super strong bonding agent, instead stumbles upon a microsphere attack that barely clings. His jars of failure gather polite dust until choir singer colleague Art Fry yearns for bookmarks that won't slip from hymnals. Fry trims scrap yellow lab paper, brushes a stripe of the fugitive glue across one edge with a cafeteria coffee stirrer, and presses it into sheet number 0. He counts brush passes 1, 2, until the strip shines like a cat's blink. Later he measures, roughly half an inch, about 13 millimeters. There is no formula, only the width of a casual wrist flick governed by mid-tempo hymns. Early testers complain longer glue lines fold pages. Shorter strips curl at corners like wary hedgehogs. Fry splits difference at 12 millimeters, scrawls works. On the square, sticks it to Silver's door. 9 days later, it still clings. No one notes humidity. Pilot runs in 1974 coat strips by conveyor rollers set without ruler engineers. Position blades where the glue stops dripping onto gears. First batch emerges with bands 11 millimeters wide on the left, 12 on the right. Marketing dubs the product press and peel. Users mostly peel, rarely press. Yet width variation passes unnoticed because novelty blinds critique like sunrise through frosted glass. A micro hook drifts by each half minute. A Minneapolis secretary tests cling strength by attaching notes to her Siamese cat's spine. The 11 millimeter holds until lunchtime, 12 dislodges by coffee break. She records findings on a note stuck above the coat rack, thereby validating glue through glue. In 1980, the rebranded Post-it note debuts nationwide. Machines now meter adhesive in viscous rivers calibrated by syringe pumps chugging like sleepy metronomes. Pump engineers choose exactly half an inch, 12.7 millimeters, because the control dial leaps every 20th turn. Stopping mid-tick feels unlucky. Retail focus groups, seated in windowless rooms under flickering fluorescents, peel prototypes and confess that anything wider feels too grabby, anything slimmer floats away. The Goldilocks band is born, printed in presentations as 0.5 plus or minus love. Sales skyrocket. Glue width lodges quietly in corporate DNA, a Hashem Haras. Europe, metric to its marrow, recoils from fractions. French distributors snip off a single millimeter 12 exactly, then boast optimized adherence. German engineers, distrustful, test 60-second shake rigs. 12 millimeter notes survive 142 shakes before surrendering to gravity, whereas 11 millimeters manage 137. Engineers nod gravely, adopt 12, and draft a report titled Halfstreif if 80 Beschwingungsbeeinprank that lulls even the typist to near doze. Still, some Spanish printers, charmed by prime numbers, tinker to 11. Thus subtle variety flutters like migratory birds across supply closets. Recycling booms in the 1990s, and paper mills hum with post-consumer fiber. Rougher textured drinks. Glue greedily, so chemists widen strips to 13 millimeters to compensate. Packaging flaunts new super sticky backing, though real hero is width, not chemistry. Students discover these notes cling to brick dorm walls, perfect for pixelated murals visible from quad. Store managers cringe at restock pace, yet width remains 13 until Mill's perfect smoother eco stock, whereupon marketers trim to 12. Again, citing sleeker tier line. Eco virtue disguised as minimalism, or vice versa. Numbers obey whichever slogan whispers loudest that quarter. Smartphone era seems poised to suffocate paper, yet sticky squares adapt. Now they flag lenses. On laptops, shy defenders against webcam peeping. Tech bloggers recommend narrower glue to avoid residue. One Silicon Valley startup commissions 10 millimeter micro stickies dyed anxiety calming teal. Users applaud portability, curse spontaneous escape under air conditioning vents. Complaints drift upward. By winter, production discreetly widens to 11. Blog enthusiasms move on, leaving glue in peace. ISO stirs its tea, chamomile this time, and in 2011 issues guideline 16,754, removable notes adhesive application. It recommends a band between 10 and 13 millimeters, centered or edge aligned, ensuring peel radius under 6 nm. The phrase, peel radius under 6 reads like lullaby curvature. Manufacturers continue at 12, safe centrants. A footnote nods toward artisan widths for aesthetic interest, blessing boutique stationery makers who later dab stripes of 8 millimeters scented like yuzu or cinnamon. These artisanal notes star in unboxing videos, yet invisible hand. Of practicality returns mainstream to 12 by fiscal quarter's end. Pandemic home offices breed refrigerator galleries of reminders and affirmations. Humid kitchens reveal that steam loosens anything under 11. Parents rediscover hairspray hack to revive fallen notes. Children craft chains by overlapping. Glue bands accidentally measuring cumulative tack until magnets surrender. A bored teenager times drip rates on TikTok. Her viral graph shows 30mm vintage, super sticky, outlasting 10mm. Minis by 6 avocado toast intervals, a unit she never defines. Still, Graph's pastel palette soothes millions into nodding agreement before algorithm sweeps them onward. Tonight, peel a note from whatever pad lingers near keyboard, perhaps sun-faded yellow, office blue, or motivational coral. Thumb the adhesive ridge. Feel microspheres cling like polite burrs. Slide fingertip from one edge to the other, counting. Maybe 10mm, maybe 12. Maybe a rogue 11 and half trimmed on a Friday shift. Each pass whispers decades of calibration. Coffee stirrer brush strokes, syringe pumps, shake rigs, webcam paranoia, avocado toast metrics. Inhale faint aroma of acrylate mingled with recycled pulp. Exhale as square drifts toward monitor bezel, kissing glass with soft tack, then release. Watch note hang, hinge, hover. Light breath might sway it, yet spheres clutch with Goldilocks. Grip. Strong enough to wait out your wandering attention, gentle enough to depart without scarring surface or ego. Soon eyelids mimic adhesive energy settling, holding, releasing as numbers blur. 10 slides toward 11, 11 eases into 12, 12 drifts to warm approximation. Let thought scrawl half a sentence across pastel comb, then leave remainder. Blank for morning. If dreams flutter in, they may perch along that glossy strip, resting on microspheres engineered to resist urgency, until dawn peels them free, ready to reposition wherever the next quiet reminder belongs. You might not expect that the tiny sheath crimped around the ragged end of a shoelace. The aglet hardly wider than a lintel could coax Roman sandal makers to time sunrise against pewter cooldowns. Persuade Victorian schoolboys to chart playground corals in fractions of an inch. Unspark one mercifully short-lived vogue for peppermint wax tips trimmed to an alleged lucky 16mm. Yet here we drift, following the slow, glinting chronicle of a glut length. If you're still awake by the time of Lister, Cobbler murmurs that 14mm lets grievances slip through the eyelet unscathed. Feel free to subscribe, or merely loosen the knot. Laces will still embrace your instep whether anyone records your blinking. The earliest whispers scuff ancient dirt roads where Roman caligulae thump dust from legion miles. Strips of rawhide, forever fraying, are cauterized with droplets of tin poured from Piet brazier ladles. A centurion, impatient for drill, clamps thumb and index finger around cooling metal, 2 finger breadths, perhaps 15mm, and snaps surplus leather free. No standard, only expedients tempered by burned fingertips. Archaeologists later unearth a child's sandal near Vindolanda bearing tips twice as long. Evidence they suggest of a father's cautious love or an apprentice's generous ladle tilt. Either way, the humble sheath already expands and contracts with human worry. Centuries shuffle forward to 15th century Venice, where glassmakers, banished to Murano for fear of fire, stretch molten canes into filigrana lace tips. The delicate cylinders, cooled and pressed onto silk ribbons, glow like captive dawns. Their average length, just under 18mm, matches the span a glassblower's iron tool travels between heartbeat and exhalation. Courtiers praise the sparkle. Thieves find them fragile, snapping under hurried flight. One micro hook wafts by every slow minute, A Doge's secretary notices that when tips exceed 20 millimeters, they clink against marble floors, echoing gossip down corridors. He petitions for restraint. Artisans reply with a shrug, decrease by 1 millimeter and call it compromise. Industrial England hammers brass ferrules by steam. A Nottingham machine, patented 1842, feeds ribbon through rollers that shear tips exactly 5/8 of an inch 15.9 millimeters. Because the gearing borrowed from a stocking frame clicks there with least vibration, mill foremen boast. Perfect efficiency, though workers claim anything above 16 millimeters bruises ankles inside stiff boots. Letters to management go unanswered until a supervisor trips over his own laces, prompting a hasty recalibration to 15. Catalogs quietly print the new figure. Nobody mentions the tumble. Meanwhile, schoolboys measure status by tip shine. Longer brass gleams suggest thriftless parents. Shorter tin hints at speed over grace. Playground hierarchies not themselves. 1 millimeter at a time. Across the Atlantic, rubber factories of 1910 Akron adopt celluloid sleeves spun on heated mandrels. Celluloid, prone to crack if too long, settles near 13 millimeters. Salesmen claim that baker's dozen length wards off fray for 13 months, a promise impossible to confirm yet comforting as a lullaby. Housewives sniff the faint, camphor scent, and believe longevity plausible. Then comes rayon, slippery as rumor. Tips extend to 17 millimeters to grip fibers firmly. Newspapers run columns worrying that longer aglaes invite vanity. Columnists counter that shorter invite tripping. Somewhere between caution and pride, 16 becomes the midpoint most ankles trust. War rationing swaps brass for paper-wrapped glue tips measuring 12 millimeters. Trimmed by shears held in cold warehouses. Soldiers thread boots quickly. Shorter tips pass through mud-clogged eyelets with fewer snags. A quartermaster's report tallies lost minutes to relacing and concludes 12, advances morale by stealth. Post-war abundance balloons plastic. Factories splurge back to 15. Fashion photos of 1953 highlight pristine white sneakers, whose tips, exactly 15.5 millimeters, dangle like smug commas at the end of cotton sentences. Teenagers mimic length with scissors and candle stubs. Bedroom carpets accumulate puddles of wax where experiments drip. Fluorescent malls of the 1980s introduced neon tubing, encapsulating lace ends, heat shrunk PVC flush to 14 millimeters, so colors pulse but edges resist fray. Athletic brands whisper about aerodynamics no stopwatch verifies. A bored lab intern times marathon knots, finding difference inside margin of a cough. The report languishes in a drawer, yet marketing breathes. Life into the claim. Shoes fly off shelves, tips glowing under black light, length quietly locked at 14 because packaging dyes refuse more decimals. ISO bruised chamomile. And in 1996, drafts guideline 4218, footwear lace end terminations. It recommends 12 to 16 millimeters for adult footwear, permitting passage through standard eyelets under 5 millimeters diameter. The footnote muses that child shoes may adopt joyful deviation. Manufacturers heed safe middle 14 in sport, 15 in dress printing compliance icons shaped like tiny flags. A rogue Italian designer rebels with 8 millimeter micro tips, citing minimalism. Customers curse threading time and tips stretch to 10 the next season. Minimalism humbled but not erased. Eco-minded 2010s resurrect cotton dipped in soy-based resin. The thicker coating demands slightly longer cones, 16 millimeters, to start taper sooner. Boxes flash leaf symbols. Bloggers applaud biodegradable swagger, yet humidity softens resin. Fray returns. Hobbyists share hacks, clear nail polish, heat shrink straws, wax floss. The swirl of DIY solutions hovers around 15 millimeters, as though the collective subconscious aims for the old brass sweet spot, while pretending to innovate tonight. Untie whatever shoes rest nearby beaten sneakers, polished Oxfords, maybe. House slippers with humorous faces. Gently pinch the tip between thumb and forefinger. Feel ridge where plastic yields to weave. Slide nail along length. Perhaps 12 millimeters whispering wartime diligence. Maybe 15 humming mid-century optimism. Maybe a shy 13 that compromises between eras. Inhale fabric mixed with faint vinyl. Exhale as lace threads out. In, out rhythms older than sidewalks. Note how each sheath keeps chaos at bay, whispering promises of knocks that won't betray your stride. Let fingers count loops until numbers blur. 12 drifts toward 14. 14 leans into 16. 16 melts into pleasant approximate. Sets you aside. Watch lace ends lie quiet as commas awaiting next footnote. If dreams saunter in, they may trace tip length like soft rulers. Across midnight carpets, measuring nothing, proving nothing, yet holding world gently together at each frayed edge until sunrise ties the first bow of the day. You might not expect that the hollow cylinder through which we coax lemonade, the modest drinking straw, no thicker than an idle shoelace, could lure Victorian barmaids into weighing mint leaves on brass balances, persuade airline stewards to chart turbulence in fractions of a millimeter, and ignite one blissfully brief craze for vanilla-scented paper tubes trimmed to precisely 7.6 millimeters in diameter. Yet here we drift, following the slow, unremarkably remarkable chronicle of straw width. If you're still awake by the time a Liverpool soda jerk confesses that 6 millimeters lets grievances gurgle before surfacing, feel free to subscribe or simply keep sipping. The drink will rise to meet your lips, even if no algorithm applauds your persistence. The earliest sips passed through rice stalks culled from Sumerian riverbanks 4,000 years ago. Farmers chew ends, discovering that sap both sweetens and stiffens. The stalks measure whatever nature wills, typically between 5 and 8 millimeters. Inside yet clay jugs brim with barley beer too murky to quibble about bore. Archaeologists later find gold-tipped lapis straws in a royal tomb at Ur, 8 millimeters wide. Scholars debate whether width signifies status or simply the girth of reeds surviving tributary floods. Either way, diameter drifts with floodplain whim, standards unborn, complaints muffled beneath centuries of sediment and silence. Glassblowers of 17th century, Bavaria introduced reusable sippers they called Tranquil to dodge crackling. Heat, apprentices wrap molten threads around brass dowels borrowed from clockmakers. Dowels happen to be 7 millimeters thick, the distance between opposing teeth on a gear blank so. The first glass straws exit furnaces identical in girth to timepieces. Nobles find the width genteel. Peasants find the cost alarming. One micro hook floats by every drowsy half-minute. A Duke of Württemberg decrees that thicker 9 millimeter tubes invite slothful gulps, while thinner 6 millimeter strands whistle like gossip. His edict survives a single banquet, forgotten as soon as musicians pack lutes. Yet the 7 millimeter median lingers, cooling into habit. Industrial America, 1888. Washington B. Moseley complains that rice straw sheds woody flecks into his mint julep. He winds paper around a pencil, glues edge with paraffin, pulls graphite free, and peers through a newborn tube exactly 6.5 millimeters wide, the pencil's own waistline. Moseley's neighbor, Marvin Stone, patents the method. Factory mandrels replicate diameter to avoid recalibrating steam cutters. Stone later experiments with 5.5 millimeters for children's chocolate milk, but finds bubbles weaken seam. Width returns to 6.5, soon rounded up to a cleaner quarter inch, 6.35 millimeters in catalogs because fractions reassure procurement. Clerks, soda fountains blossom in Art Deco glow. Countertops host fluted glasses where ice cream bulges like sleepy clouds. Employees notice thin straws jam with fudge whirlpools. Manufacturers swell bore to 7.2 millimeters, printing Parlor Deluxe on boxes. Customers lick foam regardless, yet marketing hails the new, generous gullet. During Prohibition, speakeasies trim straws to 5 millimeters so clinking cocktails appear demure. Police raids measure liquor, not aperture, so the ruse survives until legality yawns awake. Again, post-raid drinkers celebrate with width swung back to 7, a pendulum of revelry measured in quiet circles. World War II diverts paper to rations. Rayon and cellophane emerge, extruded through dies cut at 6.9 millimeters, the sweet spot where viscous cellulose neither collapses nor flares. Military research notes that pilots sipping coffee through 6.9 millimeters tubes spill 12%, less during barrel rolls than with 8 millimeters canteen spouts. The data hides within appendices few civilians read, yet surplus straws flood diners at war's end, cementing a near 7 millimeters expectation in jukebox parlors. Teenagers lazily chew ends, flattening diameter into ambiguous ovals that still pass soda with faithful indifference. Enter polyethylene in the fluorescent bustle of the 1960s. Injection mold machines hum like distant lawnmowers, pressing plastic. Into rolls later sliced by circular saws set rigidly at 8 millimeters because the engineer designing blade spacing loves even numbers. Larger bore means milkshakes climb without wheeze. Marketing coins super slurp. Parents worry children. Inhale dessert too fast. Some diners tape 2 4 millimeters skinny sippers side by side for compromise. A California patent follows, claiming twin straws teach math symmetry. Schools test the concept for exactly 1 semester before janitors revolt at doubled litter. Single. 8 millimeters regains throne. Paperwork sighing into archives.bubble tea dawn in 1980s. Taiwan bursts tapioca pearls the size of lazy marbles. Vendors hacksaw PVC pipe at a bold 12 millimeters inside diameter, enough to launch spheres upriver of gravity. A Type A student, stopwatch in hand, times pearls sailing throatward and declares it the cadence of small applause. The width migrates worldwide, first as novelty, soon as necessity. Coffee chains panic. In house labs, they settle on 9 millimeters. For frappes wide enough for ice chips, narrow enough to dodge pearl envy. Thus cafe drawers evolve into botanical gardens of diameters. 5 millimeters stir straws, 6 millimeters soda straws, 7 millimeters shake straws, 9 millimeters blended behemoths, 12 millimeters boba conduits, each species marked by silent rings.iso eventually brews. Lemongrass tea and releases technical spec 15,504. Drink delivery tubes, nominal bore. It recommends 5.5 plus or minus 0.3 millimeters for carbonated beverages, 7 plus or minus 0.4 millimeters for viscous liquids, 12 plus or minus 0.5 millimeters for particulate suspensions. Footnote: intermediate sizes may be adopted where regional preference or culinary innovation dictates. The clause culinary innovation sounds like lullaby permission. Manufacturers continue at legacy widths, carving just enough variation. To appease regulators and novelty alike. Environmental murmurs swell into bans on single-use plastics. Paper returns reinforced by water-based coatings that add drag. To compensate, engineers nudge bore from 6.5 to 7.1 millimeters, allowing pulp fibers thicker margins before sawed. Packages boast wider for eco-breathability, though. Real motive hides inside tensile charts. Metal and bamboo straws join the cupboard chorus. Many board at 8 mm by convenience of drill bits sold in packs of 8. Silicone flex straws for toddlers shrink back to 5 mm so gums stay safe. Diameter once more follows toolkits and temperament, less decree than daydream. Tonight, tilt whatever vessel you've carried to bedside, maybe a chip diner tumbler, maybe a mason jar moonlighting as glass and cradle the straw poised within. Thumb and forefinger circle its circumference. Is it the brisk 5 mm of iced coffee haste? The classic 6.5 mm quarter-inch of colas past. The indulgent 8 mm. Promising malted reward, or the jubilant 12 mm daring pearls to cannonball. Inhale fate syrup mingled with fate plastic or paper. Exhale as bubbles rise through hollow channel blurb. Pause. Blurb until breath sinks with liquid's gentle climb up. Notice how each diameter carries stowaways. Sumerian reeds, Bavarian. Blast gears, jukebox brass, cockpit spill charts, tapioca tides, lemongrass annexes. Numbers glaze. 6 mm melts into 7. 7 drifts toward 8. 8 gently widens until only hush remains between sip and silence. Let straw lean against rim, waiting. Perhaps it tilts, perhaps it stays. If dreams seep now, they may travel bore to vessel floor, curling, among ice cubes that clink like dozing bells, until dawn lifts tumbler to lips once more. Diameter forgotten, yet perfectly ready to measure another unhurried swallow of day. You might not expect that the little aluminum loop you flick away without a thought, the pull tab, whose gentle arc unseals fizz and promises brief carbonation, could coax naval engineers to time condensation on battleship decks. Persuade. Theme park vendors to rank wish fulfillment in millimeters, and ignite one blissfully short vogue for rose-scented tabs stamped to an allegedly auspicious 21 mm span. Yet here we drift, following the slow silvery chronicle of pull tab ring length. If you're still awake by the time of Wichita, Chemline Foreman murmurs that 19 mm lets grievances hiss instead of pop. Feel free to subscribe or merely sip. Bubbles will rise whether anyone measures your murmur. The pre-tab era of the 1930s forces thirsty souls to wield church keys steel wedges that puncture crowns in 2 jabs. Every jab leaves jagged petals. Picnic blankets collect nicks like tiny war medals. In 1959, Pittsburgh's Irma Fraze, forgetting his opener on a sweltering family outing, resolves that no parched diner should dual tin ever again. Early sketches show detachable rings riveted to scored lids. He snips prototypes from meatpacking foil, folds them over soda bottles, and pulls. The first working loop, bent around a matchstick, measures 24 mm tip to tip, because that is the width of the kitchen drawer slot where the matches had slept. Beer tastes of victory, yet fingers complain the loop feels like wrestling a sardine can. Phrase trims to 22, then to around 20. Neighbors nod, thumbs unbruised. Wick settles by degree of side dot. Alcoa presses the design into billions. Of Temperate Series 3004 lids. Mandrels guiding the cutout are polished brass rods exactly 19 mm across. Chosen because the toolmaker's grandson guessed 19 was one shy of 20 and 20 feels boastful. Production managers, eager for harmony, quote this as ergonomic insight. A micro hook tiptoes by every half minute. A St. Louis plant nurse records that thumb blisters drop 5% after shrinkage from 21 to 19 millimeters. The statistic hides inside a newsletter wedged between bowling league scores. Yet the loop lives on, modest, neat as a fingernail moon. Detachable tabs litter beaches by dusk. Gulls swallow them whole. By 1975, environmental murmurs swell. Engineers conjure the stay, tab loop stays, but disc bends inward. To maintain leverage, they stretch ring length back to 21 millimeters while slimming gauge. Consumers think cans open softer. Designers secretly celebrate that the extra 2 millimeters simplify robotic creepers already tuned to cigarette lighter caps. Machines hate change. Loops comply. Warmer climates reveal that sweaty fingers skid off narrow rings. Caribbean bottlers coat loops with grainy varnish and shave 0.5 millimeter, so varnish adds back thickness without angering label printers. Tourists collect sunburn and curious statistics. A Bajan bartender swears 19.5 millimeter loops summon the perfect splash, though no one grasps the claim. Still, the varnish fad drifts north, briefly perfuming boardwalks with coconut-scented husks until costs drone nostalgia. Wength returns UNSC ENTE. Wars of the 1980s. Paint tabs neon cherry red for cherry cola. Cobalt for diet layer stacking microns of pigment so thick the dye set must widen inner void to 19.3 millimeters less paint scrape. Marketing copy calls this bold gateway, a phrase that drifts across airwaves at midnight and tucks teenagers into sugar dreams of infinite refills. Meanwhile, factory statisticians whisper a sleepy punchline. Widening ring by 0.3 costs 1/10 of a cent per million cans, but televised adjectives cost millions. Numbers shrug, loops endure. The airline boom favors slimmer arms lighter by fractions of gram. Aerospace suppliers adopt 18.8 millimeter rings to pair with rivets shaved to save jet fuel. A Boeing engineer jokes they remove the weight of 1 pretzel per flight. Accountants applaud. Passengers taste no difference except, perhaps in the hush of cabin hiss quieter, engineers claim, because narrower loops flick open at lower acceleration. Someone records acceleration on a pocket seismograph during a red eye. Data wiggles into oblivion like drowsy Morse.iso, finally steeps Ruibo's tea and issues standard 12,872 ring pull openings for beverage ends. It recommends 18.5 to 20.5 millimeters, balancing finger purchase, material economy, and minimize projectile risk. The phrase projectile risk evokes pillow fight menace yet soothes shareholders. Most lines anchor at 19. Boutique breweries rebel with vintage tall poles 23 millimeters, so mustaches may clear foam elegantly. Hipsters applaud. Recycling centers frown at odd alloys. Eco-turn of the 2010s resurrects plant-based lacquers. Corn resin coatings puff slightly under cure, so toolmakers adjust gap to 19.2 to avert sticking. Machines sigh grateful. Meanwhile, craft soda startup prints motivational quips inside rings. Breathe slower, blink softer, loop still 19 because serenity loves symmetry. Customers photograph wisdom, never measuring. Tonight, cradle Anakin nearby, maybe seltzer murmuring lime, maybe stout humming cocoa, maybe plain water disguised as sparkle. Rest thumb beneath the loop's arch, feel rim cool as dusk. Slide nail along inner ellipse 1 fingertip plus a patient whisper. Hear faint tick as rivet size loose. Lid dimples inward with a hush older than pop charts. Bubbles shiver free. Climbing 19 millimeters of promise dot, notice how each millimeter varies stowaways. Picnic matchsticks, bowling newsletters, coconut grit, seismograph lullabies, mustache foam. Numbers blur. 18 drifts toward 19. 19 leans into 20. 20 folds politely back. Let tab rest against lip. Now useless but loyal. If dreams fizz up, they may glide through that silent ring, expanding or contracting at will. Until dawn tips the last sip, loops squint, and another quiet measure of day begins, precisely as wide or as unhurried as needed.